Who ever wanted to grow up to be a saint? No? Fireman, policeman, nurse, doctor, lawyer. Why not a saint? Did a saint ever come to mind? Did somebody just want to be like holier than thou? Maybe I should ask, what's your definition of a saint? Someone who gets killed, someone who's martyred. Many saints were martyred, absolutely. And to be sainted, actually, you're right. To be sainted in the Catholic tradition, or what we would consider one tradition or understanding of being sainted, is you have to be dead before you can be sainted. You have to be, another definition, you have to be really close to God, like very holy, a very virtuous person. You have to be able to do miracles. Did you know that in the Catholic tradition, I think, depending on which source you look at, there's over 800 and some people who have been sainted through history. But if you go to the Protestant tradition, you find out that to be a saint, we actually interpret that all people, individuals who have Christ in their life, are saints. Have you ever thought of yourself as a saint? Is it dangerous to think of yourself as a saint? Does all of a sudden your standard for sainthood just drop a notch or two when you think of yourself in that category? You know, how many of you have seen the movie Saint Vincent? Okay, it's a good and funny, humorous movie. Saint Vincent Vincent McKenna is an old, actually I might even say an old codger. He's a little rough around the edges, got a military background and a little bit of a challenging, but he happens to be the neighbor to this young woman and her son, and she needs somebody to watch him after school. See, now you've seen it. And he's looking for a place to stay, and he volunteers. Actually, how much are you going to pay me to watch a kid, and he's not really even that excited about it. In fact, the rough around the edges is, the thing is, most parents would not be totally okay when their child is being taken to the dog track or is surrounded with all kinds of other things that are not maybe child or age appropriate. And yet, in the midst of this time together, this bonding that this young boy and this man does, he begins to see through the cracks. He begins to see through the rough edges of this man and see the heart of a person that is much deeper and much more real. And in the end, he's in a class that they've been studying sainthood, and he has to nominate someone to be a saint. And he stands up in front of his class and he says, Vincent McKenna is the man that he wants to nominate. And he goes through this whole list, and he kind of ends with this little spiel. He says this, he said, yes, Mr. Vincent McKenna is flawed. He is seriously flawed, but just like all of the other saints that we studied, because after all, saints are human beings, very human beings. Courage, sacrifice, compassion, humanity, these are the marks of a saint. In this sermon series for the next month and a half, we're going to be looking at what it means to be a saint, what it looks like to be a saint, the markings of a saint. And in fact, right after Halloween, anybody remember what the next holiday is? That was a trick question. Not Thanksgiving. What's the day after? All Saints. All Saints Day is actually the day after Halloween. And we're going to be celebrating saints. We're going to be celebrating people who have gone before us, people who have meant something in our lives, people who have helped shape and form our faith, people who have been there for us in the good days, in the bad days. And in weeks to come, we're going to have cards, a wall that we can fill of names of people who've meant something to us. In a way to celebrate when we walk in and see these names and be reminded that we have people who have built up our faith. And by the way, this wall, you don't have to write down just names of people who are dead. You could write down names of people who are still living, who still mean something to you today. We're going to celebrate sainthood, but in a different way. As a kid, I didn't really know what a saint was. I thought they were these perfect people. Actually, for a while, I might have even thought that all adults were saints until I grew up and realized that's not so true. I began to realize that there's something flawed in each of us. In fact, at some point I realized that all saints have a past and all sinners have a future. If you didn't know that, this is a good phrase. All saints have a past and all sinners have a future. So now I don't know where you're at in that category, saint or sinner. Anybody want to just say that you're perfect now? Just save the sermon. Saint Augustine, one of the early church fathers, and in fact one of the early church saints, born 354 AD, wasn't ordained until he was 37, so he was really kind of a second career pastor or bishop as he became. He becomes a saint, but some things that he's very well known for, he writes this book called City of God, which you can still get published, and he wrote this book called Confessions, which if you really want to read some good confessions, he's got them in there. We find out that in his earlier life, he had a few things that were messed up. He was not always saintly. And in fact, it goes through and lists the fact, the relationships that he had, the lovers, the child out of wedlock, the messy life and arranged marriages that didn't happen. And in fact, interestingly enough, his most famous quote is this. He's praying to God, and this is his prayer. He says, Lord, grant me chastity and continence, but not yet. Have you ever prayed that or thought that? God, I really want chastity. I really want continence. I want to do the right thing. I want to be good, but not right now because this is looking a lot better. I think that's sometimes our honest feeling or our honest prayer. It's like, God, I want those things, but can I just wait a while? Augustine is a saint. But he realized in himself even that there's something that is innately flawed in our humanity. In his book, he writes about a story about him stealing as a child. He and his friends, they go and they steal fruit from a tree, and he said it wasn't even because we were hungry. We weren't hungry, but it was the fact that it was forbidden. And I stole it. He said it was foul and I loved it. I loved my own error, not that for which I erred, but the error itself. In the incident, he concluded that the human personality is naturally flawed, naturally inclined to sin, and in need of God's grace. Have you ever thought about that? Have you ever thought about yourself as naturally bent towards sinning and needing God's grace? I think sometimes we just ignore it altogether. But the truth is this. Augustine teaches us the first characteristic about being a saint. The first thing I'm talking about today is to be a saint, you have to acknowledge you're not perfect. Okay, can anybody do this? Anybody acknowledge you're not perfect? So far, you're all in the category. You're safely declared you are eligible to be a saint. Does that make you feel a little bit good? You are eligible to be a saint because you're not perfect. Okay, and what I really like about this particular passage, and I would encourage you, if you haven't got it up on your YouVersion app, I'd encourage you to pull it up or look at it a little closer because it says this in these verses, and it's kind of the sandwich. In one verse it says, if we say we have no sin, we deceive ourselves, and the truth is not in us. And then in the last verse it says, if we say we have not sinned, we make God a liar, and his word is not in us. Yikes. And I'm going to come back to what it says in the middle here. Have you ever known anybody who says that they've not sinned? Or believes, maybe right now at least I'm absolutely perfect? I actually remember in seminary there was a couple individuals who were quite certain that they had not sinned. Now, I didn't want to be the one to point this out to them, but if nothing else, the pride in the fact that they had not sinned is in itself sinful. The truth is, we all stand in need of God's grace. And I would not want to be the one there standing and saying, I've not sinned, God, I've not sinned, and then I'm making God a liar. But what's really neat is between these two verses that's saying if we say that we've not sinned, that we're making God a liar, that we're deceiving ourselves, what's in the middle is the important part. The part that's a qualification for being a saint. And it says this, it says, if we confess our sins, he is faithful and just to forgive us our sins and to cleanse us from all unrighteousness. You see, it's not the fact that we have to be perfect to be a saint. It's the fact that we have to confess that we're not perfect to be a saint. We have to confess that we're sinful and we're broken and we need help. And then, because we do that, God promises us that he's going to cleanse us and he's going to make us righteous by his grace and his mercy and by the sacrifice of Jesus Christ. I don't know about you, but to me, that's good news. To me, that's assurance of salvation because it's something I can't do on my own. I don't have to stand before God and say, hey, God, I got this. I'm good. I'm perfect. I've got my life all straightened out. I don't have to do that. What I have to do is stand before God and say, God, I'm sinful. God, I'm flawed. God, I'm broken. And I need your grace. And the good news is I stand here to tell you today we can all be saints by standing before God and saying, God, I'm not perfect. Please cleanse me by your sacrifice, not by my works. I'm going to challenge you this week to do two things. I'm going to challenge you this week when you go home to spend time each day in your prayer time or as you're driving. You take a little bit of contemplation time and let that one thought run through your mind. God, I'm not perfect, but cleanse me. Make me righteous by your sacrifice. And then I want you to think about this whole role of being a saint. I want you to think about people who have been saints for you, who have pointed out and led you in the direction of faith. And I'm going to challenge you through this month, not just to put names of people on a wall, but if there are people that have touched your life in powerful ways that are still around today, I'm going to encourage you to write them a note. It doesn't have to be long. It could just be a postcard. But say, thank you for inspiring my faith. Thank you for being an example to me of what it means to be a godly parent or a sibling. Thank you for directing my life and helping make me who I am. I believe that God puts us in relationships and in communities in such a way that, we're not just here to worship. We're not just here to feel good about singing a song or praying a prayer or to hear a message. We're here about lifting each other up, about being saints for each other and for the world. To me, that is powerful. So is that. God has given each of us the opportunity to be saints. And today, I'm telling you, we start by being not perfect. Would you pray with me?